Welcome to my channel. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's get started. Mark Ramsey gazed out of his corner office window, the Seattle skyline blurred by rain-speckled glass. At 35, he had what many would call an ideal life, a project manager at a booming tech company, married to Amanda, a marketing executive for a famous fashion brand for 5 years. They had no children, but their life felt full of happiness and stability. He glanced at the framed picture on his desk of him and Amanda at their favorite restaurant, both grinning broadly. It was taken just last month during one of their regular date nights. The routine they had settled into felt cozy and reliably comforting in the best way. His phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. "Don't forget we're trying that new Italian place tonight. Can't wait to see you. Love you." Mark smiled, warmth spreading through him. Even after 5 years, Amanda still made him feel like the luckiest man in the world. He quickly typed back, "Wouldn't miss it for the world." "Love you too." As he returned to his computer, diving into yet another set of project reports, Mark couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. He was determined to advance in his career, to provide the best life for him and Amanda. The long hours felt worth it because it was all for their future. Later that evening, as they sat across from each other at the restaurant, candlelight flickering between them, Mark reached for Amanda's hand. "To us," he said, raising his wine glass in a toast. Amanda's smile was bright as she clinked her glass against his. "To us, and to many more years of happiness." As they talked and laughed over dinner, sharing stories about their day and making plans for their upcoming weekend trip, Mark felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was what he worked so hard for, these moments of connection and joy. Little did he know, cracks were already forming beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. Months later, Mark found himself once again working late into the night. The office was quiet, with most of his colleagues having left hours earlier, but he was too absorbed in preparing for a crucial client presentation to notice the time. His phone buzzed again with a message from Amanda. Another late night. Mark glanced at the clock, wincing when he saw it was past 10 p.m. He quickly replied, "Sorry, big presentation tomorrow. Don't wait up." A long pause followed before Amanda's response came through. That single letter spoke volumes. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. He knew Amanda was upset about his long hours, but he was so close to landing a major account. If he could just push through for a few more weeks. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the distance between Mark and Amanda widened. Their once vibrant dinner conversations faded into silence. Weekend trips became a thing of the past, replaced by Mark's constant need to catch up on work. Amanda, once so open and loving, had grown cold and distant. Mark couldn't recall the last time they had been intimate. 6 months, maybe longer. He convinced himself it was just the stress, that things would improve once this big project was completed. One night, Mark came home late, as usual, expecting Amanda to be asleep. Instead, he found her sitting in the dark living room, lit only by the glow of her phone. "Hey," he said cautiously, setting down his briefcase. "Everything okay?" Amanda looked up, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Just working late," she said flatly. Like you. Before Mark could respond, she stood up and brushed past him, heading to their bedroom. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Mark alone in the darkened room. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. When had things gotten so bad between them? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing Amanda, but he didn't know how to make things right. Work had become Mark's constant companion, his source of validation, and the idea of stepping back now, when he was on the verge of achieving his goals, seemed impossible. Sitting alone in the quiet house, Mark made a silent vow. Once this major project was behind him, he would make things right with Amanda. They would go on a trip, reconnect, and rebuild what they had lost. He just needed a little more time. But as Mark would soon realize, time was not on his side. It was a quiet Tuesday night, and Mark had drifted into a restless sleep around 10 p.m., his mind still buzzing with work stress. Amanda had texted earlier, mentioning she was working late, something that had become increasingly frequent over the past few months. Mark, too exhausted to see the growing distance between them, hadn't given it much thought. The sharp ring of his phone broke the silence, jolting Mark awake. He fumbled for his phone, squinting at the screen, which displayed an unknown number. Confused and still groggy, Mark answered. "Hello." "Mr. Ramsey," a deep, authoritative voice said. "This is Officer Johnson with the Seattle Police Department." Mark sat up, suddenly wide awake, his heart racing. Yes, this is Mark Ramsay. What's happening? There was a pause on the line, thick with unspoken tension. Mr. Ramsay, I regret to inform you that your wife, Amanda Ramsay, has been arrested for solicitation. The words didn't register at first. Mark blinked, sure he had misheard. Solicitation? I don't understand. There must be some mistake. I'm afraid not, Sir Officer Johnson replied, his voice sympathetic but firm. Your wife was caught in a sting operation attempting to engage in prostitution. The room spun. Mark clutched the edge of the bed, struggling to grasp what he was hearing. Amanda, his Amanda, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone. This can't be right, Mark stammered. Where is she? Is she okay? She's currently being held at the downtown precinct, Officer Johnson explained. She's unharmed physically, but understandably upset. You can come to the station to see her and discuss bail options. Mark's mind whirled. Bail? Prostitution? How had his life unraveled so completely in one phone call? I'll be right there, he whispered, hanging up the phone. Mark sat motionless on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. The life he believed in, the marriage he trusted, had shattered in an instant. With trembling hands he began to dress, his mind flooded with questions. How long had this been going on? Why would Amanda do something like this? Had their entire marriage been a lie? The drive to the police station was a blur, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He kept hoping he would wake up, that this was just a terrible nightmare. But as he pulled into the precinct's parking lot, the harsh reality of the situation hit him. His wife, the woman he had promised to love and cherish forever, had been arrested for prostitution. The foundation of trust on which their marriage was built crumbled beneath him, replaced by a deep chasm of betrayal and deceit. As Mark walked into the station, his mind raced with unanswered questions and a growing sense of anger. He was about to confront a side of Amanda he never knew existed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Mark's footsteps echoed through the sterile hallway of the police station, each step feeling like a mile, his thoughts still spinning from the call that had upended his world. The buzzing fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows, mirroring the growing darkness in Mark's heart. Officer Johnson guided him to a small room, pausing with his hand on the doorknob. She's in here, Mr. Ramsay. Take all the time you need. The door creaked open, and Mark's stomach churned at the sight before him. Amanda sat slumped at a metal table, her wrists bound in cold handcuffs. Dark streaks of mascara stained her cheeks, and her usually immaculate hair was a tangled mess. She appeared small and fragile, nothing like the confident woman he thought he knew. For a moment they sat in silence, the tension between them so thick it felt suffocating. Mark's mind raced, a flood of questions fighting to be asked first, but when he finally spoke, only one word escaped his lips. Why? Why? Amanda winced at the raw pain in his voice, her eyes glued to the table, unable to meet his gaze. I'm sorry, Mark, she whispered, barely audible. I've been seeing other men. I've been doing this for months. The words hit Mark like a physical blow. He stumbled back, gripping the table to keep his balance as the room seemed to spin, his reality warping. Months, he echoed, his voice filled with disbelief. What do you mean, months? How could you? His voice cracked, a mix of anger and heartbreak vying for control. Why would you do this? Amanda hunched even further, as if trying to shrink away. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red and filled with shame mixed with defiance. I wasn't happy, Mark, she said, her voice gaining strength. You're never home. We haven't been close in months. You shut me out, and I felt so alone. Her voice wavered, but she continued. When I met those men, it was the only time I felt alive. Mark recoiled, as if struck. So you threw away our marriage because I've been working hard to provide for us, he shouted, his voice rising. You let strangers touch you. For what? Because you were bored. Amanda's eyes flashed, showing a glimpse of the woman he once knew. I needed something you couldn't give me anymore, she shot back, her words sharp and hurtful. I didn't care. If I had to turn to the streets, I felt more wanted by strangers than I ever did by you. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Mark stared at her, unable to reconcile this bitter, angry woman with the loving wife he thought he knew. How long, he asked, his voice hollow. How long has this been going on? Amanda looked away, shame flushing her cheeks. 6 months, she confessed quietly. At first it was just flirting, harmless attention, but then she trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Mark's head spun. 6 months. Half a year of lies, betrayal, every late night at the office, every text he'd ignored, suddenly took on a dark new meaning. Who else knows? He demanded, fear gripping him at the thought of a looming scandal. Amanda shook her head. No one. I was careful. Or at least I thought I was, she said with a bitter laugh. Guess I wasn't careful enough. Mark paced the tiny room, running his hands through his hair. His world was falling apart, and he had no idea how to fix it. What happens now, he asked, more to himself than Amanda. She looked up, her eyes pleading. I don't know, she admitted, but Mark, please, I need your help. I can't go to jail. It would destroy everything for a moment. Mark was tempted, his instinct to protect her, honed over years of marriage, flared up. But then he remembered the cold indifference in her voice when she spoke of feeling wanted by strangers. The woman he loved was gone, replaced by someone he no longer recognized. You should have considered that before deciding to sell yourself on the streets, Mark said, his voice icy. You made your choices, Amanda, and now you have to live with the consequences. He turned away, unable to look at her any longer. But as his hand gripped the doorknob, Amanda's voice stopped him. Mark, she pleaded, desperation laced in her words, please, I love you. We can fix this. He hesitated, considering her plea, but without turning back, he replied, no, Amanda, we can't. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. With that, he walked out, leaving the shattered remnants of their marriage behind. As the door closed, Mark felt a sense of finality. His old life was gone, and what lay ahead was uncertain. A week after that night at the police station, Mark found himself in a stark office, staring at a stack of papers that would officially end his marriage. The divorce lawyer across from him spoke in a quiet, sympathetic voice, but Mark barely heard him. His mind was still spinning from the events of the past week. He had moved out of their shared apartment, unable to endure the memories that haunted every room. The small loft he rented closer to his office felt barren and impersonal, mirroring the emptiness inside him. As he mechanically signed page after page, his thoughts drifted back to the happy moments he and Amanda had once shared. The day he proposed in a sunlit park, their wedding day, her radiant smile as she walked down the aisle, lazy Sunday mornings spent reading the paper and planning their future. Now, all those moments felt tainted, corrupted by the knowledge of Amanda's betrayal. Had any of it been real, or had she just been playing a role, waiting for something or someone better? The lawyer's voice broke through his daze. Mr. Ramsay, we're finished here. Do you have any questions? Mark blinked, looking down at the signed documents. It seemed unreal that 5 years of marriage could be dissolved so quickly, reduced to nothing but a pile of legal papers. No, he said, his voice rough. No questions. As he left the office, divorce papers tucked under his arm, Mark was overwhelmed by a blend of emotions. Anger still simmered beneath the surface, ready to erupt at any moment, but there was something else too, a sense of determination. He refused to be a victim in this story. Amanda had made her choices, risking everything they had built together for fleeting satisfaction. Now, it was her turn to deal with the fallout. Mark's jaw tightened as he stepped onto the busy Seattle streets. He was determined to reclaim his life, starting with his career and ending with Amanda's fate. She had no idea what was coming. In the following weeks, Mark threw himself into his work with an intensity that surprised even his most driven colleagues. He arrived at the office before dawn and often stayed past midnight, fueled by a potent mix of caffeine and righteous anger. His boss noticed the change, commending his dedication and hinting at a potential promotion, but Mark barely acknowledged the praise. His mind was locked on one objective: success, not just for himself but as retribution against Amanda. He would rebuild the life she had discarded, become the man she deemed unworthy, and when he reached heights she could only dream of, he would make sure she knew exactly what she had lost. As days turned into weeks, Mark's pain began to solidify into something colder and more calculated. He started gathering information, calling in favors from contacts in the industry. Amanda's arrest hadn't hit the news yet, but Mark knew it was only a matter of time. Mark hired the top divorce attorney in the city, instructing them to be ruthless in the settlement negotiations. Amanda had wrecked their marriage, and he intended to ensure she walked away with nothing. One late night, as Mark sat in his empty loft going through case files, his phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Can we talk, please? I miss you for a moment." His finger hovered over the reply button. A part of him, buried beneath layers of pain and resentment, still longed for the bond they once shared. But then he remembered her cold, dismissive words at the police station. And the way she had disregarded their years together. With a firm swipe, he deleted the message and, after a brief pause, blocked her number. There would be no reconciliation, no second chances. Amanda had made her choices, and now she would have to live with them. As he returned to his work, Mark felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The path ahead was clear. He would rebuild his life step by step and ensure Amanda fully grasped the impact of her actions. It was no longer just about revenge, it was about justice. While Mark focused on putting his life back together, Amanda's world continued to collapse. What began as rumors confined to police reports and courts and courthouse whispers soon erupted in the local media. The headlines were merciless, plastering her mugshot across newspapers and websites. Marketing executive caught in prostitution sting, and from boardroom to street corner, the fall of Amanda Ramsey. Amanda sat in her living room, the curtains drawn tight against the prying eyes of neighbors and reporters, scrolling through the endless stream of articles on her phone. Each one felt like another blow to the coffin of her once bright career. Her company, the fashion brand she had worked tirelessly to rise through, wasted no time severing ties. The termination email arrived less than an hour after the first news report, citing her criminal charges as a breach of conduct. Reading the cold, impersonal words that ended her job, Amanda felt a surge of nausea. It wasn't just her job she had lost, it was her identity, her self-worth, her entire future. The men who had made her feel desired when Mark's attention had waned disappeared overnight. Texts went unanswered, and calls went straight to voicemail. The excitement of secret encounters was replaced by a crushing loneliness. Friends, who once eagerly celebrated her successes, now ignored her calls. Social media became a minefield of judgment and scorn, with comments ranging from fake sympathy to outright cruelty, each one chipping away at what little confidence she had left. As days turned into weeks, Amanda found herself drowning in legal fees and growing debts. The lavish lifestyle she had enjoyed, designer clothes, fancy dinners, regular spa visits, became a distant memory. She had to sell her car and then her jewelry just to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Through all of this, Amanda kept hoping Mark would reach out. Despite the harsh words they had exchanged and the betrayal that loomed between them, a part of her still believed he would come to her aid. But as weeks turned into months without a single word from him, that hope slowly faded away. One especially bleak evening, Amanda sat alone in her increasingly empty apartment, staring at an old photo of her and Mark. It was taken on their honeymoon, both of them sun-kissed and laughing on a beach in Bali. They looked so young, so in love, and so full of hope for the future. Tears filled Amanda's eyes as the full weight of what she had lost came crashing down on her, not just her job, not just her social standing, but the one person who had always stood by her, the person she had pushed away in her reckless search for excitement and validation. With shaking hands, she picked up her phone and dialed Mark's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. His familiar voice, now edged with coldness, played through the speaker. "You've reached Mark Ramsey. I'm not available right now. Please leave a message." Amanda opened her mouth, a flood of apologies and pleas for forgiveness on the verge of spilling out, but all that emerged was a strangled sob before she hung up, curled up on the couch, clutching a pillow tightly to her chest. Amanda grasped the true cost of her actions. She had risked everything: her marriage, her career, her reputation, and lost it all. The life she once knew was gone, broken beyond repair by her own selfish choices. Meanwhile, across town, Mark was sitting in his office, working late as usual. He barely glanced at his phone when it buzzed, a blocked number, a silent reminder of the life he had left behind. Instead, he focused on the woman seated across from him, Harper Mitchell, a colleague he had known for years but had never truly noticed before. She was reviewing reports with him, her dark hair neatly pulled back into a bun, her green eyes sharp and attentive as she pointed out errors in the data. As she spoke, Mark began to notice things he had never seen before: the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet confidence in her voice, and the calming effect her presence had on the turmoil inside him. "Mark, are you listening?" Harper's voice interrupted his thoughts, a hint of amusement in her tone. He blinked, realizing he had been staring. "Sorry, just lost in thought." "You were saying?" Harper smiled, her expression warm and understanding, sparking a flicker of something in Mark's chest. "I was saying maybe we should call it a night. It's late, and these numbers will still be here tomorrow." Mark glanced at his watch, surprised to find it was well past midnight. "You're right. I'm sorry for keeping you so late." "Don't apologize," Harper replied, gathering her things. "I'm glad to help, and I know things have been rough for you lately. If you ever need someone to talk to," she left the offer hanging, unspoken but clear. Mark felt a surge of gratitude, mixed with something else he couldn't quite define. "Thank you, Harper," he said softly. "That means a lot." As they walked out of the office together, Mark felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't quite happiness, but it was close. It was hope. For the first time since that night when his world had collapsed, Mark allowed himself to envision a future beyond the pain and betrayal, one where he wasn't defined by Amanda's actions, but by his own resilience. As he watched Harper drive away, waving goodbye with a warm smile, Mark realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a light at the end of this long, dark tunnel. For the first time in months, he felt ready to move toward it. Mark Ramsay sat in his corner office, his fingers steepled beneath his chin as he looked out over the Seattle skyline. It had been 6 months since the night his world imploded, 6 months of anger, pain, and a slow burning need for retribution. He had buried himself in his work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Late nights and weekends at the office were his new routine. His colleagues whispered about his dedication, and his boss praised his results, but few knew the darkness that fueled him. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Harper Mitchell, the confidante who had been by his side these past months, stepping in with a steaming cup of coffee. "Thought you could use this," she said, placing the mug on his desk. "You've been staring at that skyline for an hour." Mark managed a faint smile. "Thanks, Harper." Just thinking. She perched on the edge of his desk, concern clear in her green eyes. "About Amanda," he nodded, making no effort to hide it. Harper was one of the few people who knew the whole story of his ex-wife's betrayal. She had been his anchor during the divorce, a steady presence when everything else in his life felt unstable. "I can't let it go," he confessed, his voice low. "What she did, it can't just be forgotten." Harper's brow furrowed. "Mark, you've already won the divorce settlement." "It's not enough," he interrupted, his voice edged with bitterness. "She ruined everything we built together. She needs to face the consequences of her actions." Harper looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Mark's expression held her back. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Just be careful, okay? Don't let this consume you." Mark nodded, but as Harper left, his mind was already spinning with plans. He opened his laptop, fingers moving quickly as he logged into a private messaging forum. Over the past few months, he had built a network of contacts in various tech companies around Seattle, people who owed him favors or liked being in the loop on the latest industry buzz. Now, it was time to call in those favors. He drafted a carefully crafted message, hinting at Amanda's indiscretions without directly mentioning her arrest. The message was clear: hiring her would be a risk. As he hit send, a small voice inside him whispered that this was wrong, that he was crossing a line. But the memory of Amanda's cold words in the police station silenced that doubt. She had made her choices, and now she would face the fallout. In the following weeks, Mark watched from a distance as Amanda's attempts to rebuild her life met obstacle after obstacle. Every job application was met with polite rejections. Every networking event ended in awkward silences and avoided looks. Her once stellar reputation, built over years of dedication, was crumbling. The whispers followed her everywhere. "Isn't that the marketing exec who got caught, you know?" Mark told himself he felt nothing as he watched her struggle. But late at night, when the office was quiet and he was left alone with his thoughts, he couldn't quite shake the image of her tear-streaked face in the police station. To drown out those nagging doubts, Mark buried himself even further in his work. The results were undeniable. His team's productivity skyrocketed, securing major contracts that once seemed unattainable. One Friday afternoon, his boss called him into his office, a rare smile on the older man's face. "Mark, I don't know what's gotten into you these past few months, but whatever it is, keep it up. The board's impressed. There's talk of a VP position opening soon, and your name's at the top of the list." Mark nodded, accepting the praise with a tight smile. The taste of success was sweet, but it wasn't enough, not yet. That night, as he sipped scotch in his still bare apartment, Mark made a decision. It was time to twist the knife one last time. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for: the top divorce lawyer in Seattle, the one who had handled his split from Amanda. "Jim, it's Mark Ramsay. I need you to review something for me. I want to ensure the divorce settlement is ironclad, no loopholes, no room for misinterpretation. I want her left with nothing." As he hung up, a cold sense of satisfaction settled over him. But Amanda had gambled away everything they had built for brief moments of thrill, and now she would truly feel the weight of her choices. The next morning, as Mark drove to the office, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the rearview mirror. For a moment, he barely recognized the man staring back at him. The easy smile and warm eyes that once defined his face were gone, replaced by a hardened, unforgiving mask. He turned his gaze away, suppressing the flicker of discomfort. This was who he had to be now, strong and unwavering. The man Amanda had once dismissed as not good enough was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone who would never be hurt again. Amanda Ramsey stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, the words blurring as tears welled up in her eyes. This was rock bottom. The life she had worked so hard to build had disintegrated into nothing. But her hands trembled as she unlocked the door, stepping into what had once been her refuge, but now felt like a tomb, haunted by the ghosts of her past mistakes. She sank onto the couch, her mind racing. How had it come to this? Just 6 months ago, she had it all: a successful career, a beautiful home, a loving husband. Now, she was broke, homeless, and completely alone. The phone on the coffee table caught her attention. She picked it up, scrolling through her contacts. Names that once symbolized friendship and opportunity now felt like reminders of her failures. Every call for help had been ignored, every plea for a second chance had been met with silence. Her finger hovered over Mark's name. She hadn't spoken to him since that day at the police station when the full impact of her betrayal had hit. The memory of his face, twisted with pain and anger, still haunted her. But she was out of options. With shaking fingers, she pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, her heart pounding with each unanswered ring. Just as she was about to hang up, there was a click. Hello. Mark's voice, once so comforting, now sounded distant and cold. Mark, she breathed, a mix of relief and fear flooding her chest. It's me, Amanda. There was a long pause, and for a moment Amanda feared he would hang up. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm but guarded. What do you want? Amanda, the words spilled out in a rush. I need help, Mark, please. I've lost everything: my job, my apartment. I don't know what to do. I know I don't deserve it, but you're all I have left. Another pause followed, stretching so long that Amanda thought the call had disconnected. Then Mark's voice came through, tense and restrained. Meet me at the diner on 5th in an hour. Don't be late. The line went dead before she could respond. Amanda stared at her phone, a mix of hope and dread twisting in her stomach. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline, a small chance. An hour later, Amanda sat in a booth at the back of the diner, nervously tearing at a napkin. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see Mark walk in. The warmth she remembered had been replaced by a cool detachment. He slid into the seat across from her, his expression unreadable. Thank you for coming, Amanda said softly, fighting the urge to reach out to him. She swallowed, noticing how different he looked: harder, colder. I didn't think you would. Mark's eyes met hers, and she flinched at the coldness she saw there. Say what you need to say, Amanda. I've got a meeting in 30 minutes. She swallowed hard, trying to suppress the lump in her throat. I made a mistake, Mark, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am so sorry. Mark's expression remained unchanged. Is that all? Amanda blinked back, tears. No, I need help. I've been evicted. I can't find work. I'm drowning in legal fees. I don't know what to do. She reached into her purse, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. This is the address of the motel where I'm staying. It's all I can afford. Please, Mark, I know I don't deserve it, but if you could help me just this once. Mark took the paper, briefly scanning the address. For a moment, something like pity flashed across his face, but it quickly vanished, replaced by that same cold mask. You're right, he said, his voice low and hard. You don't deserve my help. You didn't feel sorry when you were tearing apart our marriage, Amanda, when you were with strangers. Did you ever think about the consequences? About the life you were throwing away? Amanda flinched as though he had slapped her. Mark, please, he cut her off, his words as sharp as knives. This is your life now, Amanda. You made your choices, and now you live with them. He stood, towering over her. For a brief second, Amanda caught a glimpse of the man she had married: kind, compassionate, always willing to help. But then he was gone, replaced by this cold stranger wearing her husband's face. Goodbye, Amanda, he said, turning to leave. Don't contact me again. As the diner door closed behind him, Amanda buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling with silent sobs. She had bet everything on this meeting, clinging to the hope that some remnant of the man she once loved still existed. But now that hope was gone and she was completely alone. Outside, Mark walked briskly to his car, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. He told himself that the tightness in his chest was satisfaction, not regret, and that Amanda's devastated expression didn't affect him. Sliding into the driver's seat, his phone buzzed with a text from Harper. How did it go? Mark stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "It's done." "She won't bother us again." He started the engine, pushing away the nagging voice in his mind that whispered he had gone too far. This was justice. He told himself exactly what Amanda deserved. As he drove away, Mark didn't look back at the diner. If he had, he might have seen Amanda stumble out onto the sidewalk, lost and alone in a world that no longer welcomed her. But he didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. The man who might have once felt sympathy for his ex-wife's situation was gone, replaced by someone harder and colder, someone who would never be vulnerable again. Scene 3, the final twist. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as Mark settled into a seat at the back. He hadn't planned to attend today, but something compelled him, maybe a need for closure, or perhaps just morbid curiosity. Amanda sat at the defendant's table, her once polished appearance now a shadow of its former self. Her hair hung limply around her face, and her designer outfits had been replaced by a plain blouse and skirt that had seen better days. She looked small and defeated. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Mark watched the proceedings unfold, his face expressionless. The charges were read aloud: repeated solicitation and a breach of her probation from the initial arrest. Amanda's lawyer, a young public defender who appeared barely out of law school, made a weak plea for leniency, but Mark knew it was futile. He had made sure of that. The judge's voice was firm as he delivered the verdict. "Miss Ramsey, given your repeated offenses and violation of probation, this court sentences you to 18 months in state prison." A murmur spread through the courtroom as Amanda's shoulders sagged, her head bowing under the weight of the sentence. As the bailiff approached to take her into custody, Amanda looked up, her eyes scanning the room. For a moment, her gaze locked with Mark's. He saw a flicker of recognition, followed by a complex mix of emotions: hurt, anger, regret, and desperation, all swirling in her eyes, a silent plea that Mark refused to acknowledge. He remained stone-faced as the bailiff handcuffed Amanda, the cold metal clasping around her wrists with a finality that resonated through the room. It was the same way she had been led away that night months ago, when Mark's world had first come apart. As Amanda was escorted out of the courtroom, she glanced back one last time, her final glimpse of freedom showing Mark standing there, impassive and unreadable, watching her with detached coldness. The courtroom doors swung shut behind her with a dull thud. It was over. Mark stayed seated as the room emptied around him. He had thought that watching Amanda face the consequences of her actions would bring him satisfaction, maybe even closure. But instead, he felt nothing, a vast, hollow emptiness where his anger had once burned brightly. He rose slowly, adjusting his tie as he exited the courthouse. With each step, Mark felt an unfamiliar sense of lightness. The burden of betrayal and revenge that had fueled him for so long seemed to be lifting. Outside, the Seattle sky was a vivid blue, and the air was crisp with the hint of autumn. Mark took a deep breath, feeling as though he was emerging from a long, dark slumber. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from Harper. How did it go? Mark stared at the text for a moment before replying, "It's done." Time to move forward. As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, Mark sensed a change within himself. The cold, vengeful man who had driven Amanda to her downfall was fading away, like ice melting in the spring sun. In his place was someone new, someone who had endured betrayal and emerged stronger, someone with a renewed sense of purpose and direction. He thought of Harper, of the kindness and understanding she had shown him over these past months, and of the late-night meetings that had gradually grown into something more meaningful. Maybe, just maybe, there was space for hope in his life once again. Mark squared his shoulders and walked toward his car, the courthouse behind him standing as a monument to the past he was determined to leave behind. Ahead of him lay uncertainty, but also possibility. He had reclaimed control of his life, faced betrayal and disgrace, and ultimately, he had risen stronger than ever. As Amanda began her time behind bars, Mark stood tall, prepared to face whatever came next. The man who had once been defined by his marriage and Amanda's betrayal was gone. In his place stood someone renewed and victorious. Mark Ramsay had won in every sense of the word. As he drove away from the courthouse, Mark allowed himself a slight smile. The future stretched out before him, bright with potential, and he was ready to grasp it with both hands.